Welcome to What We See, conversations across indie education with microschools, homeschool families, and hybrid programs about what they're actually doing, how they know it's working, and what the metrics miss. All right, I am here today with Meghan Pileggi of Collective Leadership Academy in North Carolina. What part of North Carolina?
We're in Eastern North Carolina, in the Kinston area specifically.
Very cool. All right, so I connected with Meghan through the Vela network, and we've had some conversations ahead of this one just to get to know each other a little bit, and found her story really interesting. And I'm happy to have you here on this next episode of What We See. Meghan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start out as we normally do, and you can just tell me and whoever's listening along here. Um, Walk me through, who you are, how you got to this point. You're running Collective Leadership Academy now, which is a hybrid program for homeschoolers, Eastern North Carolina. Um, what were some of the, give me the synopsis, but what were some of the kind of inflection points in your journey that, whether they were light bulbs or just catalysts for leading you to become a microschool leader, which now you're running a quickly growing, successful microschool.
Yeah, so um, my name is Meg Pileggi, as we already said, and I am a mom of five. I started parenting about 11 years ago as a foster parent in Virginia, and we just had a lot of kids that they were in the public school system, and they just really struggled. And it wasn't until recently, about 2 years ago, as we were preparing for my youngest daughter to enter school, that we just didn't feel like there were options that would be viable for her to just thrive in. She does have autism, and the resources available in our area, we're kind of a resource desert, so there aren't really specialized schools that meet the needs of autistic children. Another motivation for me to start Collective Leadership Academy was my own academic journey. I was a high school athlete, a state pole vaulter, state swimmer. I went on to college on scholarship for sports. But when it came to academics, I thrived in the classroom, but I didn't thrive when it came to the standardized testing and all of the reports. So whenever you would look at me on paper, you'd be like, man, this girl doesn't know anything. But it was just because I just struggled with that standardized testing model. And so I ended up getting into college based off of my ability to prove that I was academically smart in a classroom, despite the test, as well as my academic ability. And so I graduated my undergrad with academic honors from Virginia Military Institute and went on to serve as a Marine Corps officer for 6 years active duty, for reserve prior to commissioning. And during that time, I was able to prove that, like, I am smart. I know that when it comes to testing, I just really struggle as a tester. And so the motivation for Collective Leadership Academy really came out of those two just stuck points for me, is like academics don't have to be measured by all these test scores. And then two, like, how can I provide an academic environment for children who don't fit that traditional model, like my daughter, who sitting in a classroom for 6, 7 hours a day is really challenging for her. But then also being one of 20 plus students in a classroom, I just didn't feel like she would thrive in that environment. So those were kind of my two motivators to start Collective Leadership Academy.
Wow. So thanks for sharing that. There's a lot in there that I want to a lot of threads to pull on. First of all, I'm curious to know, you're saying you weren't, like, you struggle with test taking, but I guess it sounds like you found a way to overcome that, or you put extra energy into that because it was necessary to kind of get to where achieve your goals. Is that accurate? But
Correct.
now you're just saying,
Yes.
like, I'd like to just create an environment where that doesn't have to be the emphasis or the detour that kids have to take, right?
Yes. So in high school, I was always great at submitting work and doing what was asked of me. But when it came to the test, I didn't perform academically well. I think when it came to the SAT and the ACT, I was in the bottom 5% of test takers for the SAT and the ACT. And when you're applying to a four-year
Mm,
university, they're looking at that and they're like,
right.
I think the wording that they said was not likely to succeed on a collegiate level, is what I was told when I started applying. And I was like, man, like, not likely to succeed. Like, I know I'm smart. I know that I can academically. Um, I know what I'm saying. I know what I'm doing. I know I'm learning, but I can't prove it on a test. I can't prove that I'm
Mm.
proficient on a test. If you ask me to write a paper or do a speech, like I can do it, but I can't prove on a standardized test that I know what I'm talking about.
So interesting because I feel like there's a lot of problems that like reducing education to test taking and standardized testing and grades creates. But on the flip side, you have often will have kids who are like really good at school and really good at test taking, but then they don't actually have confidence in themselves in real world applications or in like that actually like what have you learned. And so then you
Yes.
have, the problematic part on the other side is you have someone who's like has confidence, feels like they have real world skills, feels like they are ready to go and like take on their, take on life in this next phase, but can't can't manage to thread that needle that the standardized testing is asking them to.
Yes. Yes.
There, the other part of what you shared that I find really valuable to talk about. We're both in North Carolina, where the Opportunity Scholarship Program has proliferated in the past 3 or 4 years. It's become universally available to all families, and it's politically really a hot topic. And one of the big, well, there's lots of kind of like, you know, oppositional talking points against it. And one of them is often that, these funds are just going to kids who are already going to private schools and already have the means to attend private schools. That's not the case in the school that I run, but it can be the
Mm-mm.
case in the greater part of Charlotte, where I am, in a big city where there's lots of like expensive private schools. And there's a big disparity between, how much private schools cost and what people can truly afford. And there are ways that the program could be structured differently um, to make it more accessible for folks. But one of the talking points is often that in places like Eastern North Carolina and more rural places, there aren't any private schools. And so these are places where education options are needed badly, or public schools are the worst. And now there's all this money being taken out of public schools, which is also not necessarily true, but and given to these scholarships, and there's no private schools in places like Eastern North Carolina for these kids to go anyway, right? And so your story is like, to me, like so important, because it's like, okay, well, because of this money that's available to families now, and because there are people who have the kind of ambition and the drive and the desire that you do, now there can be options very quickly if you remove the roadblocks, and they can be
Yes.
ones that serve kids, with autism, right? So tell me a little bit more
Yes.
about like just kind of the being like, hey, I'm gonna go do it.
Yeah. So wow, it's amazing when I look back at just starting the school. I started doing research, started reading, started being more aware of what's available, and with being in a resource desert of, Lenore County, we're kind of smack dab in between Greenville and Goldsboro and New Bern and Jacksonville, but there's really nothing where we're at when it comes to micro education and having that more intimate relational um educational model. And so where we are, we're in a very high poverty area. A lot of our kids would not have access to the scholars to our school without the scholarship. The scholarship makes a way for them to be able to have this intimate, tailored education. And so our school we're about 20% special needs. So we are able to accommodate children who typically in a public school would just be thrown into a general population classroom and just moved on every year, year after year. Um, they may not meet the goals, but they're still moved on. And so because we are a micro school, we keep a 1 to 6, 1 to 7 ratio of student to teacher or facilitator. Sometimes that's what we call them, as facilitators. And so we keep that smaller, intimate environment for them. And we're only able to do that because the Opportunity Scholarship provides a way for many of these families that are tier one. We are just in a very, very poor area. We don't have the means necessary in this area. A lot of the families don't have the means necessary, so they have had to rely on public education in an area where they struggle to recruit teachers in the public schools.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. I'm just glad to have the conversation. I'm gonna try to get it out there. I don't know, some NC legislators, some Democrats
Yeah.
to hear this conversation to
Well,
understand, like, this is, people who I may actually share some political affinity with on other issues, like,
yeah.
to hear this conversation. It shouldn't be so politicized, because I think there's just real people out there trying to solve the problem, and
Yeah.
these programs are at least paving the way, though imperfect in how they're structured, to allow people to try to solve the problem. So,
And
just
I think
kudos to
too,
you
like
too, for
when
doing that.
legislators hear, they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I say, "Oh, Kinston, North Carolina." The first thing people think is gang violence and crime. That's the first thing. You look at all these reels that people post about worst places to live in North Carolina. Kinston is always number one or two because of the gang violence, because of the crime. And I think that by tailoring an education where we're focusing on these children's character, we're developing them into leaders, we're breaking that generational cycle of these kids going right into the same thing that they've grown up in.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. All right, so let's talk a little bit. Like, tell me, like, Collective Leadership Academy is a hybrid program, so everyone is officially homeschooled in a legal sense, but then they enroll and they come to you. What's a typical week look like? What's a typical day look like? Since there's some kind of, like, special variation in how you're organized.
Yeah. On Mondays, our students have what are called family learning days. And so this is where parents get to pick what the child, or the child gets to pick what they want to learn. And so we have some students who have horses, and part of their family learning is caring for the horses. Um, there's always medical needs. I think one of our students has a horse that is currently pregnant. And so part of documenting and saying, like, this is what we're learning this week, they're able to show through Prism, like, hey, we are learning. It may not be in a traditional sit at a desk model, but we are learning. We're at the barn all day on Monday. We're caring for the animals. We're doing vet checks. We're looking at different, like, food that goes into, like, a duck eats something different than a chicken. Ducks need more protein. Things that I've learned through the kids' family learning projects. The other thing that we allow them to do is what are called passion projects. And so on that Monday, they can submit a proposal for a passion project. And so, like, my daughter, for example, wanted to create a cookbook for families on a budget that are big. And so, since we are a big family, a lot of times we have to double recipes. And so, for her Monday learning, she's doing a passion project of creating a cookbook. Other kids have chickens, other kids have ducks. Some families like to take field trips. So on Mondays, they document their learning through Prism of their family field trip to a legislative building in Raleigh. And then on Tuesdays, we do homeschool days where they're focused on core academics. Parents are introducing new topics that they might be learning that week through the curriculum that we provide them. And so Tuesdays are core learning days. And then Wednesday through Friday, they come on campus. And so our on campus days are typically in the mornings, we're doing our core academics, but in the afternoons, we're doing more elective based learning. We run a program called Young Marines. And so we run the Kinston Young Marine Unit. I think there's one in Mecklenburg as well. There's a Mecklenburg Young Marines. But it's a leadership development program that really seeks to break the cycle for kids, and by creating healthy habits such as physical fitness and discipline and teamwork and all these things to keep kids away from drugs. They have this huge program where they really educate on the effects of drugs and the benefits of living a healthy drug-free lifestyle. And so by implementing Young Marines into our program, the students have the opportunity to be leaders. And so we implement leadership kind of throughout the day at Collective Leadership Academy. We don't have your traditional third grade classroom or your traditional fifth grade classroom. Or what we do is we have multi-age learning. And so we found that to be incredibly beneficial when you're trying to develop leaders, because what happens is when you're in a classroom with students who are multi-aged, and you have a question, instead of going directly to the teacher to get the answer, you give the opportunity to maybe a seventh grader to teach something that they already know to maybe a third grader. And when they have the opportunity to teach it, it's reinforcing their learning in a way that you cannot manufacture in a textbook. You can't manufacture a seventh grader teaching multiplication to a third grader. You just can't manufacture that in a textbook. You can't mass produce that. And so that life skill, them having to reteach it, is just reinforcing their learning in a way that is just solidifying it for adulthood. And we do that across the board in all of our classes. We give our older students the opportunity to teach before they go to a facilitator. They have the opportunity to reach out to a peer or an older student for assistance. And it's been great until we get to standardized testing time. And then we're like, okay, nobody can talk. You can't ask your peers right now because they're so used to like reaching out. And so when it comes to the annual testing, that we have to,
Collaborating.
yeah, they're like,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, we can't talk. But, and I'm like, yeah, no, this is one of those times where you got to do it on your own. It's the only time of year you have to.
Yeah.
But it's been really cool because we have many students who wouldn't normally jump to initiate helping somebody because when they were in public school, they got made fun of for raising their hand and saying an answer, or there was a lot of
Right.
bullying that was involved. And so now we have these kids that are breaking out of their shells. And being leaders within these micro environments because they're not, suppressed by the, oh, you got to be quiet. This is busy work time in the classroom and nobody's working together. Instead, they're collaborating, and what the result is just beautiful. We see these kids that just have this wealth of knowledge that before they just kept hidden inside because they were afraid to speak up or afraid to show that what they were interested in or what they were proficient in. And so that's kind of the model. I hope I answered all the questions. Our students also run a
Oh yeah.
business as part of our curriculum. They run a foster closet. Since we are a resource desert, when kids come into foster care in our area, there's not a lot of resources for them. And so our students run a foster closet for our local Department of Social Services to come and shop, and foster parents to come and shop and get supplies and stuff that they need. And so that's part of their entrepreneurship, is running the foster closet on the side.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, not only did you answer my question, you answered a bunch of questions that I
Oh
normally
gosh,
ask
sorry.
in this along the way. I mean, which is great. I mean, like you talked about the way parents are involved in your program in a unique way. Mondays, like kind of giving that over to the family, but also giving it over to the student. And the kinds of things that kids get to learn and experience in your environment that they wouldn't in a traditional school. The not only the collaboration among peers and ages, and like making it really about learning, not about schooling and performing for a test or a grade, but also the honoring of like the kind of like cultural context that they're in with the stuff they get to do on Mondays, the agricultural stuff, like acting like giving that the kind of value that it has, and honoring that
Mm.
as not only like important learning equal to academics, but probably more important in terms of like the place it has in their lives and their future, and in our society too, right? Just stuff that like gets kind of relegated to less than important in a conventional like schooling perspective. So yeah, really helpful to kind of paint the picture of what you're creating there, which so much of it is about like I think what's I you know the learning the educational model that I helped co-found and that our school is built around is called Agile Learning Centers. And a part of like one thing that we often say is like if you've seen one ALC, you've seen one ALC. And that's because like the whole point is like to have them be adaptable and like molded to their context, like to start with the relationships and to build the experience around, your physical place, your physical community, the people that you're serving. um, that education has to be, for it to be effective, it has to be responsive and contextualized in that way. So that's something, when we first chatted, I was so kind of like, um, it struck me because I was taken by how much similarities there were to the things you were saying about your program and what mattered to you about it, and what's mattered to me for so long about the micro schools and learning communities that I've helped start and steward. And also, like, I look at your website and I see rooted in relationship as like the big bolded words, but I also see this, you know, um, Christ centered, which, to be honest, like I grew up going to evangelical churches, which was like problematic for me as a young adult. I had parents who were in that space who I think allowed me to experience the good part of that, while I kind of
Mm,
wrestled with some of the parts of institutionalized religion and dogma of, like, Christianity that weren't serving me. But my relationship with them, they always promoted relationship and like, love through unconditional relationship over rules and religion and like kind of the other stuff that I feel like
legalism.
can yeah, that can just kind of like be its own toxic thing. And so, without going into a long conversation about Christianity, I think that what struck me was like, this is the common thread about micro schools that I am wanting to kind of like shine light on and explore, is that when they are rooted in relationship, they allow something to happen that can't otherwise. And so that, to me, like, that can be true. My school is a secular school, your school's, rooted in Christianity. Like, the goodness there can exist in both spaces. Um, the real
Yeah.
truth and beauty of it. So tell me a bit about like what the relationship, rooted in relationship, means from like an educator to student kind of context.
Yeah. So the rooted in relationship really just came from my own experience with my oldest daughter. We were attending a traditional Christian school, and there would be loads and loads of homework that would be sent home every single night. And she'd be sitting around the kitchen table just crying and like stressed out and just overwhelmed. And like, um, what I learned was that in that moment, what's more important is not that she like, so me as a Marine Corps officer, we're always taught mission accomplishment, mission accomplishment, mission accomplishment. So I was just like driving her into the wall about like, you got to get it done, you got to get it done, you got to get it done. And my husband really was like, "Hey, no, no, like the relationship is much more important than the like check in the box." And so when he said that to me, I was like, "Wow, like you're right. Like I only get so much time with my child. If I don't invest in a relationship with my child, like they're going to grow up and be rebel and want to go away and not want to have anything to do with me." And so that was kind of a light bulb moment for me that like academics, yes, are important. I 100% will say academics are important, but they're not more important than the relationship that we have with our children. They're not more important than the character that our children develop. And so when we talk about rooted in relationship, it means that like we do cut out a lot of that rigidity that you see in traditional education models that of like you've got to meet this metric and this objective and this standard, to focus more on like, hey, where is this child at right now? Where are they at and where are their strengths and how can we grow off of their strengths rather than demand something from them that's going to cause them to shut down. And so that's kind of what where rooted in relationship came from, looking more at like where can we help this child um, grow without putting them in a place of complete like feeling like they're failures. We looked at the test scores and the grades and the like doing the report cards, and I just didn't have peace. As a mom, I was like, this is so like this report card to me just says that my child turned in all this work and we sat around a table screaming at each other for hours for them to turn in this work for them to get an A. But our relationship now is fractured. And to me, like, I as a college athlete, I'll tell people all the time, I was like, you can be I swam in college as an NCAA athlete. So I could say you could be a Phelps all day, but if you don't know how to treat your neighbor with kindness and compassion, and then I failed you as a teacher. Like if you
Mhm.
don't know how to care for the widow or the orphan, one of the things that like my family does for family learning on Mondays and some of our other families do is we deliver meals to elderly through the Meals on Wheels program in our area. This morning we just delivered meals to our route, and to me, like, that is a life lesson that cannot be captured on a report card. And so when I say rooted in relationship, that's what I mean is that, hey, we're doing life together. Instead of you coming home with this huge laundry list of homework, we're spending time together as a family. Like we're investing in relationships over a checklist of schoolwork to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I mean, it's just again for someone who I don't want to bring it back to the religion thing, but for someone that grew up in going to churches and had and felt like the gospel, like I feel like the work I do in education is my expression of what actually feels like real about the gospel in a Christian in the context of Christianity for me. And so like to me what you do is like that's the work, that is the work. It's not church attendance, it's not, following a list of rules. And
Mm-mm.
so yeah,
We
it's
call it
very
being the hands and feet of
yeah,
Jesus.
right.
Being the hands and feet, actually walking and doing. Yeah.
Yeah, so amazing. So I mean, again, I'm like going through my little checklist of questions here as you're talking, and you're literally just kind of hitting them all as we go. I was going to ask you, um, what's a gap between how the outside world measures whether a kid is doing well and how you measure whether a kid is doing well. Tell me about something you witnessed that mattered for a kid's growth that no
Yeah.
test or grade could ever capture. And you've kind of done that, but maybe you have any other stories or anecdotes
Yeah.
that, and then we can kind of move to the final question
I
or
can give you
closing
a
here.
specific example. Yeah.
Sure.
We have the way that we run our all of our learning is in groups. We're in group mixed age groups, and so when it comes to math and ELA, we don't do a traditional like lecture model where you lecture for 15 minutes, introduce a lesson, and then do busy work and then group work. We don't do that model. What we do when the kids come into math is that like, hey, this is your lesson for the day. You flip to it in your workbook. You work independently. If you get stuck on something, you ask a peer, and then you ask the facilitator, but we let the kids move at their own pace. So we don't demand like, hey, you have to get this done, you have to do this. We tell them at the beginning of the week, this is your recommended guide for the week. These are the 5 lessons that we would, if you would like, this is what we would like you to do is 5 lessons. For some of our kids who got stuck on a certain topic, they might not have done 5 lessons that week. They might have done three because it was maybe more difficult for them to understand, for example, long division, a little bit more of a complex thing to understand. So it took them a little bit longer to get through that section. But what I would love to just something that just stuck out to me as an educator was when we removed the demand to get your lesson done, this. When we removed that, what we saw were kids worked ahead on their own.
Hmm.
We give them a recommended guideline, but what we found is that kids were on Mondays and Tuesdays were like asking their parents, "Hey, can I work ahead? Like I want to do the next lesson. Like can I work ahead?" We had probably about 60% of our students completed their book in March and April. And they're like, "Miss Meg, can I get the next book? Like, can you order the next book for me? Like, I want to keep going." Like, and I was just blown away. I was like, what kid works ahead in a core subject? It's just not something that you normally hear. I have
Hmm.
kids this summer that are like asking their parents, "Hey, can you tell me when school's starting? Like, I'm so ready to go back. Like, I miss being there. I miss it. Can you see if Miss Meg will go ahead and give me my books for this? Like, I want to go ahead and start them this summer." And I'm just like, this is not, I grew up and like, I didn't want to go to school. I hated
Right.
school. I only went to school for for the sports. Like I was there to be a pole vaulter and a swimmer. I could care less about the academic piece, but I did it because I wanted this other outcome. And so to see kids like want to come to school, want to be together, that's something that you can't measure on a report card at all. You can't measure that kids
Yeah.
are on their own taking the initiative to work ahead in their math classes. I have kids asking me, we partner with a college called Arizona State University to introduce college academics to our sixth graders and seventh graders. I have kids asking me, "Hey, can you enroll me for another college class? Like I'm really liking this. Can I want to keep going?" Um, I think when you remove that rigidity piece, you just see these kids thrive, and you see how incredibly intelligent they are and what they're capable of.
Yeah, it's so true. It's
I
like,
hope that,
no, 100%. I mean, it's just for me, people in education and so concerned with the like, oh, the test scores are getting worse, and there's so many kids that can't read, and then also like it's like, and I'm not arguing that that may actually be true, but it's like to me not seeing that like it's a result of suffocating the life and the like vitality out of their lives and their experience because they're spending all the time in
yes,
this environment that doesn't see them for who they are, doesn't have flexibility, doesn't have a
yeah,
relationship with them. And so, it's like what kids are actually capable of when you kind of like stop with schooling and you start with like who are you and like what are you about and what do you want to achieve and what do you want to learn
yep,
and you build from that place. It's like we are just doing them it's just this kind of like like reverse energy of like when you
yeah.
demand and you put it on everyone in this kind of demand way, you lose all the action potential that's actually really there. um and you have
Can
to
I give
kind
you
of.
an example of that really quick?
Sure, yeah.
I would love to give you an example. So we had a student this summer who I did like the standard testing just to kind of see where they're at before I bought them curriculum. He was going into the fifth grade. And when I did his testing, he tested on the first grade level for math going into the fifth grade. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, like how like what has public school done? Like what am I supposed to do? Like
Right.
he's on the first grade for math. Like this is crazy." And instead of buying him a fifth grade book because he's in fifth grade and we got to push everybody along, I decided to back up and buy him a fourth grade book. And I was like, "You know what? We're just going to start a little bit behind. Like it's going to be okay. I know that you're in fifth grade, but like at our school, kids don't even know what grade they're in. That there are no grades at our school. So you don't
Yeah.
even know what grade you're in. You just get the book that Miss Meg gives you." And so we backed him up. And when we did his state testing, which I don't care about, but it's a requirement, he went from testing in the first grade to testing in the sixth grade in math. And I was just blown away. He also finished his math book early. A kid who hated school, refused to get out of bed, didn't want anything to do with being in a classroom, went from testing in the first grade, zero confidence, to testing in the sixth grade, which I don't care about testing, but we have to do it to meet the North Carolina requirement for the Opportunity Scholarship. I
Yeah.
was blown away. And then he finished his math book ahead of the end of the year. I was like, wow, like removing that rigidity piece, removing the testing, the constant, oh, you got to do a unit one test and a unit two test, and we got to do a quiz here and a quiz here, and removing that, he he blew my expectations out of the water. We were looking at getting him an IEP, and then I was like, wow, you're
Mhm.
incredibly intelligent. You're incredibly intelligent. I would have never known based off of this test.
Yeah, it's such a theme I've seen in these conversations. You know, I don't know, 7, 8, or 9 of them now, but just the kind of like, yeah, I mean, we said it, but like, less is more when it comes to like folks that are still doing some core academics in their program or still trying to are trying to resuscitate or rehabilitate kids that are coming in with these experiences in conventional school. And it's like you have to kind of pause, take a step back, and like build a relationship with the human being that you have. And then it's like
Hmm.
all things are kind of possible from that point up. So wow, so many gems in this conversation. All right, well, we're getting over the 30-minute mark here, so let me ask you the question I typically end with for everyone, just to see your perspective on it. But the question is that the dominant story about learning is that it's something measurable and that it's something that happens in classrooms. And so I'm curious what your, if that's not your story about learning, what story would you tell instead?
I think I heard it, but it broke up a little bit. Do you mind repeating it? Because
Oh,
the
oh
camera
yeah,
kind
our
of went fuzzy.
connection cut out. Yeah, the dominant story
It's
about
getting,
learning is that
yeah.
it's something measurable and that it's something that happens in classrooms. And so if that's not your story, what story would you tell instead?
I think a majority of our learning happens outside on the playground when kids are interacting with each other. That social emotional piece um, is so incredibly important to Collective Leadership Academy. I tell the kids all the time, I said, you have to be a kind human being um, to be successful in this world. And I said, you can get straight A's all day, but if you don't know how to treat other people, if you don't know how to operate with integrity and do the right thing when nobody's watching, then I failed you. And so a lot of times learning happens on the playground. We're playing Foursquare or Gaga Ball, and they get very competitive and then they start policing themselves. And um, it's just been really cool to see them that there is another model, that there is another way to educate our children that doesn't require them to be away from us for 35 plus hours a week. That we can be, as parents, we can be involved in that learning, that we can have a relationship with our kids in that learning, and that at the end of the day, that metrics aren't what define um, our students and our children, but that there's another way. I think for so long I've been brainwashed into thinking, they have to go Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and there's no other way to learn. That's the only way. And um, this past year, I've just my eyes have been really opened. I think when I first started the micro school, I had not doubts, but I was like, Lord, like, is this really gonna work? Like to only do school on campus 3 times a week and to give parents more control, is it really going to work? Like it just doesn't, it's not what I've been taught. It's not what I've observed my entire life. Like I'm really paving the way for something completely different than what I've been told to believe. And so I think just this past year I was just like, wow, like when we got to the end of the year, I was just blown away at the maturity of our students, at just their ability to talk to other adults, their ability to talk to peers, their ability to encourage and build one another up. I look at the beginning of the year and I'm like, wow, like these kids have grown so much in ways that I cannot put on a report card. There's not a metric that I can give them to show them that they've grown and that they've matured. And so that's why I love our motto is like education rooted in relationship, because relationships, whether it be with your peer, your siblings, an adult, people in your community, there's so much learning that happens um, outside of the four walls of this building.
Well, I'll just end it right there. Land to the plane. That's well said. Thank you so much, Megan Pileggi, for joining me on this episode and for sharing about your journey. I hope we can get this one in front of some folks in the great state of North Carolina and beyond.
Yes, thank you.